Come out, Rhaenyra! Where are you?
Hello everyone, this is your host, Richard, with another marvelous video. Daemon Targaryen needs no introduction. He was at the forefront during the entirety of Dance of Dragons, a war that annihilated most Targaryen dragons. Although the house lived on, Daemon is not always remembered fondly, even by the members of his own house. Having said that, his journey has been a roller coaster of loyalty, treachery, adventures, and most importantly, fire and blood. So in this video, we'll explore the entire life of Daemon Targaryen, Prince of King's Landing, King Consort, a father, a husband, and an apex warrior and dragon rider. Please note, I'll explore his history from his birth until the beginning of King Viserys' rule from the books, and then follow the show until episode 4 of season 2, which was when this script was penned, before going back to the books to find out what came next in Daemon's life until his death. Let's begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who really is Daemon Targaryen? I know that most of us who are here are really into Westeros and its politics, but there's always a few new viewers who need a bit of an introduction. Therefore, I think it makes sense to take a moment to talk about Daemon and his relationship with the other major players in King's Landing. Now, Prince Daemon Targaryen was the younger brother of King Viserys. This makes Daemon the uncle of Rhaenyra Targaryen, the daughter of Viserys. But the Targaryens are into keeping their bloodline pure, so they often marry within the family. So it didn't seem weird to most of Westeros when Daemon married Rhaenyra after a former husband. Laenor Velaryon died in the book and escaped from Westeros in the show. Apart from serving as king consort, if you're to believe that Rhaenyra is the rightful heir, Daemon also is one of the best commanders she has. You see, he's presently the most experienced and skilled warrior and wields the Valyrian steel sword called Dark Sister, which once belonged to Queen Visenya, one of the wives and sisters of Aegon the Conqueror. Yeah, the first one, the one who brought the 6 kingdoms of Westeros to his heels while riding upon his dragon, Balerion, the Black Dread. Daemon rides the fearsome red dragon called Bloodworm, who looks absolutely ferocious and thirsty for fire and blood. Later in his life, Daemon also fought a war against a bunch of people to claim himself the king of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, but he didn't keep the crown for long with himself. We learn most about Daemon from Archmaester Gyldain, and more specifically, from the pages of A Rogue Prince or A King's Brother. Needless to say, Matt Smith is doing a killer job of bringing out Daemon from the book to the screen. He's totally one of the best castings in the entire show. Now that we have that sorted, let's explore the life of Daemon Targaryen from his birth until his presumed death.
Once we smash the Triarchy, they name me King of the Narrow Sea.
A rogue arrives. The birth of Daemon Targaryen. Daemon was the second son of Princess Alyssa Targaryen and her brother and husband, Prince Balon Targaryen, in the year 81 AC. Of course, their first son was Viserys. Apart from his elder brother Viserys, Daemon also had a younger brother named Aegon, but the child died during his infancy. I wonder what he would have been like if he'd had the chance to grow into a man. Daemon was always very free-spirited, and it could have been because of how Alyssa brought him up. You see, only a week after his birth, his mother took him on a ride on Melis, who would later become the dragon ridden by Princess Rhaenys, the queen who never was. Daemon showed a particular proclivity towards warfare and swordsmanship, and he was knighted at the tender age of 16 by King Jaehaerys Targaryen. This was not a favor, because Daemon was a kin of Jaehaerys. In fact, Daemon had earned it. Sometime later, Daemon earned the Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister from Jaehaerys. Daemon was still 16 when Queen Alysanne Targaryen, the wife of the old King Jaehaerys, decided to get Daemon married to Lady Rhea Royce, the heir to Runestone. Since she was the heir, Daemon had to move in with her. Of course, the heir to the Vale couldn't leave. Unfortunately, Daemon didn't find this place to his liking and soon grew bored. Naturally, it all started to reflect in their marriage, and despite being a fine and rich match, Daemon and Rhea Royce were not happy. Eventually, the unhappiness started to turn into a dislike. Daemon had no love for his wife and started calling her his bronze bitch, thanks to the color of the armor that the Royces wore. Of course, Rhea too didn't care too much about Daemon. She was a strong, independent young woman and didn't need that shit from anyone, let alone from a husband from an arranged marriage. It wasn't before long that the couple got estranged. Anyway, 4 years after Daemon and Rhea's marriage, she became the Lady of Runestone after inheriting it from Lord Yorbert Royce. And in all these years, the couple couldn't make a baby, so the succession was a bit of an issue in Runestone as well. Once Viserys became the king of the 7 kingdoms, Daemon requested him to annul his marriage with Rhea, but Viserys refused. He wasn't someone who could set aside vows like marriage for petty reasons such as a lack of love and respect between the husband and the wife. But all wasn't lost for Daemon because Viserys did bring him out of his prison by letting him serve on the small council. Lord Protector of King's Landing. Anyway, Daemon comes back to King's Landing from Runestone and meets Rhaenyra in the throne room of the Red Keep. As it turns out, he'd brought her a Valyrian steel necklace, which he wrapped around her neck before telling her that now both of them had a small piece from their age-old heritage. As for Daemon, he had Dark Sister, which was also made of Valyrian steel. It was here that one could see a bit of sexual tension between the uncle and niece. The way Daemon fastens the necklace around Rhaenyra's neck was enough to tell anyone that they were not just relatives. Soon, Viserys appointed Daemon as the Lord Commander of the City Watch of King's Landing. He made the best use of his time in this position, which he enjoyed for at least a year. He commanded over 2,000 men and inspired the men of the City Watch by giving them new and better equipment and armament. In fact, it was during Daemon's time that the City Watch was provided with golden armor, which paved the way for the City Watch to earn the colloquial name Gold Cloaks. During this time, crime fell drastically across King's Landing, not because Daemon was eradicating crime, but criminals themselves. One night, he led the City Watch all across King's Landing. They rounded up the thieves and cut purses so that he could deliver them instant and final justice in a ruthless show of force. The men were severed, decapitated, and most met the stranger that night. Those who survived never dared to commit a crime again. Later, in a small council meeting, Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, chastises Daemon for committing mass murder, but Daemon tells him that it was a necessary action in favor of the safety of King's Landing, which was paramount since there was to be a tourney in celebration of the King's child. Additionally, the small folk were living at the mercy of King's Landing's lawlessness, so eliminating criminals was the quickest and most efficient course of action. Otto insinuates Daemon further, which leads to Daemon saying a few things about Otto's late wife. Ultimately, King Viserys had to step in to stop this squabbling. However, he does remind Daemon that such brutal and unjustified use of force will not be tolerated in the future. Also, his time as the Lord Commander of the City Watch meant that he would often have to be out there in the open. He soon became a regular at the brothels and became acquainted with nearly every gambler, whore, and cutpurse. He soon met Mysaria too. While Daemon called himself the Prince of the City, the others in the Red Keep mocked him by calling him Lord Flea Bottom. The Heirs Tournament, a giant embarrassment. When Queen Aemma Arryn was about to give birth, Viserys held a tourney to honor his would-be heir. Many warriors from different houses participated, and so did Daemon, who was representing House Targaryen. Daemon doesn't waste any time to prove that he was the most skilled and most experienced warrior in all of the Seven Kingdoms. In fact, he even defeated Sir Gawain Hightower, who was noted as the best warrior and strategist of House Hightower. Daemon gets the favor of Alicent Hightower, but all the fun and frolic stopped for Daemon when he jousted against Sir Criston Cole of House Cole, which was nothing but a minor house. Not even Dark Sister could save Daemon from getting defeated. After tasting dust, thanks to Cole, Daemon learned the hard way that arrogance can only take him so far. Interestingly, in the book, the tourney was held to honor the ascension of King Viserys, and Cole defeated Daemon twice in that tourney, first in melee and again in joust.
You've thrown back in my face!
You've only ever tried to send me away to the Vale, to the...
Heir for a day. After the deaths of Queen Aemma and her newborn, Daemon is seen at the funeral, closely observing Rhaenyra's visible resentment toward King Viserys. Despite the tension, Daemon advises Rhaenyra to stand by her father, who's more in need of her support than ever. Later, lurking in the shadows during a small council meeting, Daemon overhears Otto Hightower argue against his potential claim to the Iron Throne, comparing him to the tyrannical Maegor the Cruel. Later, Daemon is found raising a glass in a brothel among his city watchmates, where he was toasting to his nephew Balon, the heir for a day, which was an act as despicable as blood and cheese. I mean, this basically told the realm and the audience about just how cruel and insensitive Daemon could be. Tensions escalate when Viserys confronts Daemon in the throne room over his questionable way of mourning Balon, which was basically throwing a brothel party. Daemon defends his actions as his own form of grieving and throws Viserys' past decisions back at him. Daemon tells his brother how he'd always felt sidelined. First, he was sent to the Vale, and then he was put in charge of the City Watch instead of being appointed as Hand of the King. Viserys, infuriated, counters that Otto is a far superior hand than Daemon could ever be. This sets Daemon off, and he bluntly calls his brother weak, and he rides the small council as nothing more than sycophants. That totally annoys the hell out of Viserys, and he strips Daemon of his status as heir and banishes him back to the Vale. As Daemon makes a final attempt to approach his brother, the Kingsguard block him, and Daemon is forced to leave the place in rage and disappointment. Daemon takes Dragonstone. Daemon is sidelined as Rhaenyra is declared heir to the Iron Throne. Needless to say, Daemon absolutely fumes over this because he considers it a slight. So he takes his mistress Mysaria on his dragon Caraxes and heads straight for Dragonstone. There, Daemon sets up shop. He takes control of the fortress and turns the City Watch into his own personal military force. He ups the ante by swiping a dragon egg from the dragon pit and plans to dedicate it to the child he and Mysaria are expecting. Well, apparently expecting. When King Viserys sends Otto Hightower, accompanied by by the Kingsguard and his own guards to sort things out at Dragonstone, Daemon doesn't budge an inch. The situation escalates as Otto makes a veiled threat against Mysaria, which pushes Daemon to draw Dark Sister in her defense. Even Caraxes comes to the scene, prepared to Dracarys the hell out of Otto and his men. The Red Dragon forces Otto to order his men to stand down. Amidst this tension, Rhaenyra arrives on her dragon, Syrax, directly defying her father's orders to avoid confrontation. Oh yeah, Rhaenyra had previously suggested that she should speak with Daemon, but Viserys had strongly disagreed, knowing how unpredictable Daemon is. She confronts Daemon and dares him to kill her to claim his desired throne. Daemon, however, can't bring himself to harm his niece and ends up handing over the dragon egg to her. As they retreat to the castle, Mysaria confronts Daemon about lying about their marriage and her pregnancy, worried about the repercussions of his actions on her, given her vulnerable status compared to his royal immunity. Worth is not given, but made. When Corlys Velaryon, the former master of ships, summons Daemon to Driftmark, he starts off by reminiscing about the glory days of House Velaryon and its ancient ties to old Valyria. He draws parallels between their house and the Targaryens. But Daemon quickly grows tired of the history lesson and pushes Corlys to cut to the chase. Corlys opens up about the real issue, the crab feeder, Craghas Drahar, whose power is swelling with support from the Free Cities, which was threatening Velaryon's control over the crucial shipping lanes of the Stepstones. Daemon was protective of his family's reputation and warns Corlys that he alone has the right to criticize King Viserys. Corlys, seeing an opportunity, suggests that if Daemon helps him combat this threat, it could boost his standing among those who doubt him compared to his brother. Inspired by Corlys' words that worth is not given but made, Daemon agrees to join the fight against the crab feeder. However, the next 3 years prove to be a brutal and fruitless struggle. Despite their best efforts and even with Daemon's dragon Caraxes at their disposal, the geographical advantages of the Stepstones with its myriad caves allow Drahar and his forces to easily dodge dragonfire. The continued failure of their campaign begins to attract attention far and wide. All this raises debates in the Red Keep on whether King Viserys should intervene to salvage what seems to be his brother's failing war. During a war council on the Stepstones, distrust swirls among Daemon Targaryen's allies. Vaemond Velaryon, Corlys' brother, doubts Daemon's leadership as the main reason for their faltering campaign. Amidst this uneasy atmosphere, a messenger from King's Landing delivers a letter to Daemon. Viserys was gonna help out Daemon and had decided to send reinforcements, 10 ships and 2,000 men. Viewing this as an undesired rescue, Daemon lashes out in frustration and attacks the messenger. Bro, never attack the messenger. Never. Anyway, agitated and feeling like no one trusted his skills, Daemon takes a rowboat alone to Bloodstone, where he pretends to surrender. With a makeshift white flag in hand, he draws out the enemy leader Drahar and his men from their cave. He then goes on to pretend to give away Dark Sister in submission, but it doesn't take long for Daemon to turn the tide in his favor. He retrieves his sword and slashes the soldier who dared to inspect it, and then fights off the incoming troops with fierce precision, even as arrows rain down on him. Despite his valiant effort, Daemon is struck by 3 arrows, which somewhat halts his advance. Just as Drahar commands his troops to close in for the kill, Laenor Velaryon swoops in with his dragon Sea Smoke and scorches the enemy. As Sea Smoke clears the cliffs of archers, Daemon takes the opportunity to chase Drahar back into the cave. Moments later, he emerges victorious, holding the severed remains of the crab feeder, and became the king of the Narrow Sea. Back in King's Landing, after his victorious battle against the Triarchy, Daemon returns to King's Landing. Of course, he makes a grand entrance on his dragon, Caraxes. His arrival shakes up a ship carrying Rhaenyra back from Storm's End. As he walks into the throne room, Daemon approaches King Viserys, while wearing a makeshift crown of bone and driftwood and clutching Drahar's hammer. He offers the hammer to be incorporated into the Iron Throne. Viserys notices Daemon's crown and asks whether Daemon now considers himself a king. Daemon clarifies he's been dubbed King of the Narrow Sea, but reassures Viserys that he recognizes only one true king, his brother. Humbly kneeling, Daemon presents the crown to Viserys, who warmly embraces him and welcomes him home. The festivities celebrating Daemon's return are filled with lively banter, especially when Daemon and Viserys jest about who was their mother's favorite. During the celebration, Alicent Hightower suggests showing Daemon some new tapestries, a proposal that both brothers find hilariously silly. I mean, it's Daemon Targaryen we're talking about. He doesn't care about tapestries. As the evening winds down, Rhaenyra pulls Daemon aside to question the true motives behind his return. Daemon tells her that he was simply seeking the comforts of home, though Rhaenyra senses some underlying tension. The conversation shifts to Rhaenyra's fear of being forced into marriage. She tells him that a forced marriage is simply a death sentence for women, and she had her later mother to prove the fact, but he tells her that she shouldn't let her fears overpower her. never mess with the king's daughter. Sometime later, Daemon sent his niece directions to get out of the castle without being seen. She disguises herself as a page, and the two of them roam the town, blending into the crowd. They catch a play that pokes fun at the royal family. During the show, Daemon points out the public's preference for her half-brother as heir. It was basically Daemon telling her how important public perception is when it comes to royal matters. Their night takes a more intense turn when Sir Harwin Strong shows up, which leads them to a brothel to explore more adult pleasures. Things had started to heat up between Daemon and Rhaenyra, and they ended up kissing each other, which was the beginning of a more intimate encounter. However, Daemon suddenly pulls back. He was conflicted and ultimately left Rhaenyra high and dry. Of course, she took care of it with Sir Criston Cole. The next morning, Daemon woke up in the presence of Mysaria, who's moved on from her life as a prostitute and now manages the establishment. She offers him a tonic for his hangover, but he declines and tells her he'll settle his tab on his way out. Later, as Daemon attempts to re-enter the Red Keep, he's stopped and dragged to the throne room by the Kingsguard. A livid King Viserys confronts him and asks him if he dishonored Rhaenyra, potentially ruining her prospects as heir. Daemon, without directly admitting to anything, doesn't deny the implications either. Since he already hinted that Rhaenyra might not be intact, he seized the moment to propose a marriage with Rhaenyra. When Viserys tells him that he already had a wife, Daemon reminds him of the ancestral precedent set by Aegon the Conqueror, who had two wives, namely Visenya and Rhaenys. Viserys was enraged at the thought and was clearly unconvinced by Daemon's intention. The king denied the proposal because he saw it as a ploy for the throne. He orders Daemon to return to his lawful wife in the Vale and bans him from appearing before him again. So yeah, the brothers had yet another pretty dramatic fallout. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra and Laenor Velaryon decide to get into a sham marriage for the sake of their houses and futures. Both of them agree that they can get their sexual requirements fulfilled by other people.
My betrothed.
My betrothed.
Rhaenyra's first wedding. Back at Runestone, Daemon surprises his wife Rhea while she's out hunting. She was pretty surprised to see him out there, but the woman was smart and soon figured out that Daemon presumably wanted her dead to free himself for a marriage to Rhaenyra. She tries to draw her bow to defend herself, but Daemon spooks her horse. One thing leads to another, and she ends up becoming paralyzed on the ground. As Daemon begins to walk away, Rhea taunts him, calling him a craven. In response, Daemon grabs a stone and walks toward her. Of course, he intended to smash her head with it, and that's what he did. But they kept Rhea's death off-screen. Later, Daemon appears at Rhaenyra's wedding and seated himself at the royal table without an invitation. Wherever Daemon goes, controversy follows, and that's exactly what happened when Gerald Royce accused him of being responsible for Rhea's death. Daemon coolly challenges Royce to prove the accusation and reveals his plans to claim his late wife's inheritance by appealing to Lady Jane Arryn of the Vale. During the celebration, Daemon's attention shifts as he catches Laena Velaryon's eye and sweeps her onto the dance floor. Amid their dance, Laena charms Daemon with her flattery and allure. Yet Daemon pulls Rhaenyra aside when he gets the chance and urges her to reconsider her pending marriage to Laenor, predicting it'll leave her utterly unfulfilled. He boldly suggests they elope to Dragonstone and marry instead. Their intense exchange is cut short by a dramatic scene at the ceremony. Criston Cole violently disrupts the event by killing Laenor's lover, Joffrey Lonmouth, causing chaos and shock among the guests. As the dust settles, Rhaenyra and Laenor proceed with a somber, quick wedding, an event from which Daemon is notably absent, having already made his provocative mark on the day. Daemon and Laena. 10 years on from the previous turmoil, Daemon has settled into a new chapter of his life in Pentos with his second wife, Laena Velaryon, and their two daughters, Baela and Rhaena. Together, they impress the locals by showing off the might of their dragons, Caraxes and Vhagar. Later, during a dinner with Regio Haratis, the Prince of Pentos, Daemon and his family are presented with a tempting offer. The prince praises Daemon, proposes permanent residence, and offers land if they agree to support him against the Triarchy. As Laena starts to decline, Daemon interjects, suggesting they'll need time to consider the proposal. After the dinner, the scene shifts to a more intimate moment where Daemon is teaching his daughter Baela High Valyrian. Laena joins them and turns the conversation to the prince's offer. She probes Daemon's thoughts about accepting the proposal. While Daemon admits he's tempted by the peace and stability in Pentos, far from the cutthroat politics of the Seven Kingdoms, Laena expresses her concern. She's wary of becoming mere pawns for a foreign prince and longs for more than just honorary titles and comforts. Laena makes a heartfelt case for returning to Driftmark. She wants to give birth there, ensure their daughters receive a proper education among family, and live out her days as a dragon rider, not fading away in quiet obscurity. Daemon's life in Pentos takes a dramatic turn when Laena informs him of Rhaenyra's new son back in King's Landing, stirring up old rumors about the legitimacy of her children. Laena sees this news as another reason to return to Westeros, criticizing Daemon for his reclusive behavior in Pentos, where he mostly keeps to himself, reading about his house's past glories. She expresses concern that Daemon may feel trapped in a life he never truly wanted with a partner he didn't desire. though Daemon brushes off her worries. Tragedy strikes a few days later when Laena faces a dire childbirth. The surgeons tell Daemon that the only way to save the baby would be a fatal procedure for Laena. Overwhelmed and unable to decide, Daemon soon realizes Laena has made her own choice. Rushes to the beach and witnesses a heart-wrenching scene. Laena commanding her dragon Vhagar to immolate her, choosing a fiery end over her agonizing predicament. The following day, a grief-stricken Daemon shows Baela and Rhaenyra the remains of their mother from the ramparts. Laena's funeral. After Laena's tragic death, a funeral on Driftmark draws a somber crowd, including Daemon's family, Rhaenyra's clan, and the royal court. During the service, Daemon Valerian gives a eulogy with thinly veiled digs at Rhaenyra. He totally says that the purity of the Valerian blood needs safeguarding. This sparks an incredulous laugh from Daemon. Post-funeral, Daemon remains aloof. Although he catches a few glimpses of Rhaenyra and Viserys, he keeps his distance until Viserys approaches him. Visibly worn by illness, Viserys invites Daemon to return to King's Landing. Daemon, feeling more at home in Pentos now, politely declines. Their conversation ends with Daemon walking away, brushing off Viserys' persistence and distancing himself further from the royal fold. As he exits, he meets Otto Hightower, who extends condolences. Daemon, skeptical of Otto's sincerity and irritated by past conflicts, snaps at him and accuses Otto of power-hungry opportunism before storming off. Later, under the moonlight on Driftmark's beach, Daemon and Rhaenyra find some degree of peace in each other's company. Rhaenyra opens up about her troubled marriage with Laenor and reveals that Sir Harwin Strong fathered her children. She shares her regrets over their separation. Daemon suggests the Hightowers might have had a hand in the Strongs' misfortunes, but Rhaenyra isn't convinced. The conversation turns personal as Rhaenyra confronts Daemon about his past absence and questions his life with Laena. Daemon admits they were happy enough, to which Rhaenyra extends her sympathies. Rejecting the notion of subdued mourning, Daemon criticizes the double standards imposed on Rhaenyra's grief. Their emotional exchange ends in a kiss, after which they go to a secluded wooden wreck on the beach, where they make love for the first time. As the night deepens, their newfound closeness is briefly overshadowed by the sight of Aemond riding Vhagar, Laena's former dragon. Needless to say, this changes everything. Setting Laenor free. Following a clash between Daemon's daughters, Rhaenyra's sons, and Daemon and Rhaenyra rush to the Hall of Nine to mediate. Alicent and Rhaenyra exchange heated words, which makes King Viserys to call for calm. When Alicent makes a move against Luke and Rhaenyra steps in to protect him, Daemon intervenes to hold back Criston Cole from advancing toward the Queen. In the chaos, Alicent managed to injure Rhaenyra with the King's Valyrian steel dagger. Seeing this, Daemon himself confronts Alicent. The next day, the stakes rise as Rhaenyra, seeing her claim to the throne increasingly threatened by the Greens, proposes to Daemon. She suggests they marry in the tradition of Old Valyria to strengthen her position as heir. Daemon points out that they can't wed unless Laenor is out of the picture. He advises Rhaenyra that ruling the Seven Kingdoms will require instilling fear as much as it demands love and respect. To do this, she needs to set Laenor free if her feelings for him are genuine. Daemon plots with Sir Carl Corrie to fake Laenor's death. They stage a fight in the Hall of Nine, killing a servant and using his body as a stand-in for Laenor's, which they burn to stage his death. Of course, in the book, Laenor actually dies. Carl and Laenor then make their escape. This calculated move is meant to send a message across the realm about the lengths to which Rhaenyra and Daemon will go. Following their successful deception, Daemon and Rhaenyra marry in a Targaryen-style ceremony at Dragonstone, witnessed by their children and Maester Gerardis. This union not only cements their partnership, but also signals their readiness to face whatever threats might come from their enemies. The question of Rhaenyra's children. 6 years on, Daemon comes to Dragonmont, where he retrieves 3 of Syrax's eggs and hands them over to the Dragon Keepers. In return, he receives a message from his daughter Baela, relaying information from Maester Gerardis. The news is troubling. Corlys Velaryon has suffered injuries in battle. Vaemond is challenging the legitimacy of Lucerys, and Baela, along with Rhaenys, are heading to King's Landing to settle the succession of Driftmark. Daemon shares this update with Rhaenyra and tells her about his belief that Rhaenys will not back Vaemond's claim. Rhaenyra, however, remains skeptical. The rumors about her son's legitimacy and the murky circumstances of Laenor's death weigh heavily on her, especially with the Hightowers gaining influence as King Viserys' health declined. They decide it's time to head to King's Landing themselves. Upon arrival, the welcome is cold. Daemon and Rhaenyra make their way to the king's quarters, only to find Viserys bedridden and the royal apartments in a state of neglect. Daemon attempts to discuss the urgent matter of Driftmark's succession with Viserys, pressing the need to establish Lucerys as the heir. However, Viserys is too weak and confused to grasp the situation. Rhaenyra introduces their sons Aegon and Viserys to the ailing king, but a sudden spasm of pain cuts the meeting short. As Viserys calls for his tea, Daemon casts a suspicious glance at the cup, wary of what might be served to his brother in such a fragile state. They received a cold reception from Alicent, who didn't bother with any welcoming formalities. Daemon doesn't miss a beat and is sarcastic about their lack of a greeting party, and openly questioning Alicent and Otto's roles as mere stewards of the king, especially when King Viserys can hardly express his will. He accuses Alicent of doping the king with milk of the poppy and replacing Targaryen symbols with those of the Faith of the Seven. Alicent says that these changes are meant to underscore the holy authority of the Seven, which they believe should govern the Red Keep. Clearly, she was hinting that she and her father plan to assert their control over the upcoming decisions about Driftmark. At the formal petition hearing, Rhaenyra steps up to advocate for her son Lucerys' claim to Driftmark. Things were not looking good for Rhaenyra and her cause, but Viserys himself appears to support Rhaenyra. He was visibly struggling to ascend the throne, so Daemon assisted his brother to his seat and ensured his crown was properly placed. Lucerys is officially named heir to Driftmark, but this decision doesn't sit well with Vaemond Velaryon, who furiously claims he's the rightful heir. Holding back his rage, Vaemond almost crosses a line, but Daemon cunningly and provocatively urges him to go on. Losing control, Vaemond lashes out and denounces Rhaenyra's children as bastards and slanders her character. Viserys decrees punishment for Vaemond's insolence, but before any formal action can be taken, Daemon beheads Vaemond and states that he can keep his tongue. King is dead. As the hall erupts in shock, Otto Hightower calls for the guards to disarm Daemon. Instead, Daemon calmly cleans his blade and sheathes it, choosing not to escalate the situation further before leaving the court in a tense silence following the abrupt and violent resolution. During a celebratory dinner, Daemon and Rhaenyra's families come together with Viserys and Alicent's families to toast the betrothals of Rhaenyra's sons, Jace and Luke, to Daemon's daughters, Baela and Rhaena. In a poignant moment, King Viserys addresses the gathering and laments the divisions within House Targaryen over the past 2 decades. He makes a heartfelt plea for unity and an end to the familial strife. As the evening arrives, there's a rare sense of joy and lightness among the Targaryens, something that's been missing for 20 years. Daemon, catching a humorous remark by Helaena about Aegon's drinking habits, can't help but laugh. He dotes on his wife throughout the dinner, but remains visibly concerned about his brother Viserys' frail health. After the king retires for the evening, tensions flare up once again, this time among the younger Targaryens. A scuffle breaks out, but Daemon quickly steps in. With a stern look, he diffuses the situation, particularly with his nephew Aemond, who begrudgingly backs down. You may want to check out our video on the similarities between Daemon and Daemon. These two are practically the two sides of the same coin. The evening wraps up with Daemon deciding it's best to return to Dragonstone with his family and Rhaenyra. The following day brings news from King's Landing. King Viserys has died after a long battle with illness. Needless to say, his death sparks all kinds of immediate turmoil. The Greens orchestrate a coup. They start by replacing captains of the Gold Cloaks who were loyal to Daemon, solidifying their grip on power. In the chaos, the Green Council suggests the assassinations of Daemon and Rhaenyra, but Alicent ensures something so drastic does not happen. The coup culminates with Aegon II being crowned, effectively usurping Rhaenyra's claim to the throne, and plunging the realm into a precarious new chapter. Declaring Rhaenyra his queen. After the coup, Rhaenys becomes the bearer of bad news to Daemon and Rhaenyra. King Viserys has died, and the Greens have seized the Iron Throne. Daemon, suspecting foul play, wonders if Viserys was murdered by Alicent and Otto. When he presses Rhaenys on why she didn't retaliate against the Greens immediately, she tells him that starting a war isn't her decision to make. Rhaenyra is suddenly gripped by pain and discovers she's bleeding, the shock of the situation inducing premature labor. As Daemon quickly assembles a war council, Rhaenyra calls out for his help in distress. Lord Bartimos Celtigar updates him that Corlys's fever has lifted, and he's mysteriously left Evanfall, his whereabouts unknown. Daemon immediately orders messages sent to their key allies, including houses Celtigar, Massey, Darklyn, Staunton, and Bar Emmon. He plans a swift journey to Riverrun to secure the support of House Tully and the Riverlords. During the council, Jace brings a directive from Rhaenyra that all actions must wait for her approval. Daemon, driven by urgency, dismisses the caution, orders the Ravens dispatched, and directs Jace and the Kingsguard to accompany him to Dragonmont. On the mountain slopes, Daemon enforces loyalty, pressing Laurent Marbrand and Steffon Darklyn to swear fealty to Rhaenyra and acknowledge Jace as her heir. The ominous presence of Daemon's dragon Caraxes underscores the serious consequences of betrayal. Back in Rhaenyra's chambers, the tragedy takes shape as she delivers a stillborn daughter they intended to name Visenya. Daemon, arriving too late to comfort her in labor, retreats to the beaches of Dragonstone to mourn the heartbreaking loss of his daughter, grappling with the weight of the family's growing crises. The next day, Daemon and Rhaenyra solemnly stand before Visenya's burning pyre when the somber air shifts with the arrival of Sir Eric Cargill. Pledging his loyalty to Rhaenyra as his rightful queen, Ser Erryk presents a stolen crown from the Red Keep, a relic of chaos from the Green Coup. Daemon crowns Rhaenyra in a moving ceremony, kneeling to affirm his fealty along with the attendees, though Princess Rhaenys remains a notable exception. Following the coronation, Daemon and Rhaenyra convene the Black Council for the first time. Daemon formally declares Rhaenyra as the reigning queen, detailing the military strength of Dragonstone. Adequate for defense, but insufficient for conquest. He reports secured loyalties from several houses and awaits confirmation from his allies in the City Watch. Discussions turn to potential alliances with houses Tully, Baratheon, and Stark, noting that while the Starks are reliable, Lord Boros Baratheon's commitment may waver and needs reinforcement of past oaths.
Have dragons.
They have
as
3
well.
adults, by my count. We have Cyrax, Caraxes.
Leading the Black Council, Rhaenyra seeks updates from Rhaenys about Driftmark, learning that Corlys is en route, but his allegiance hangs in balance. They both acknowledge the tenuous support from House Lannister, considering Sir Tywin Lannister's alignment with Otto, which likely pulls the Westerlands away from their cause. However, Bartimos Celtigar interjects, emphasizing their advantage with dragons, unmatched since ancient Valyria, despite the Greens possessing dragons as well. Daemon underscores their aerial superiority, listing their formidable dragons against the Greens' fewer numbers, and suggests leveraging this by taking Harrenhal as a strategic stronghold in the Riverlands. The strategy session is abruptly interrupted by Ser Erryk, who reports a galleon approaching Dragonstone under a banner featuring a 3-headed green dragon. Seizing the moment, Daemon grabs his sword, Dark Sister, and commands the garrison to prepare for battle, signaling that the conflict is far from over. As Sir Otto Hightower and his negotiation party arrive at Dragonstone, Daemon is there to meet them on the bridge. Otto insists that he'll only discuss terms directly with Rhaenyra. When Otto addresses her as princess, Rhaenyra sharply corrects him, asserting her title as queen and branding Otto and his group as traitors. Otto presents Aegon II's proposed peace terms. Rhaenyra is to retain Dragonstone, which will pass to her son Jace after her death. Her son Luke will be recognized as the rightful heir to Driftmark with all its lands. Her other sons will hold prestigious positions at court, and a general pardon will be issued for any lords or knights who supported her claim. Daemon, infuriated, swiftly dismisses the offer, denouncing Aegon II with fiery contempt. Otto argues back, claiming Aegon's right to the throne is cemented by his coronation at the hands of a septon and his possession of Aegon the Conqueror's regalia. Rhaenyra counters, reminding Otto that major houses had already sworn loyalty to her as Viserys I's chosen heir. Otto dismisses these as outdated commitments, claiming they became irrelevant the moment Aegon was born. The discussion heats up when Rhaenyra forcefully removes Otto's badge of office, labeling him a traitor. In a manipulative move, Otto hands Rhaenyra a torn page from a book she once shared with Alicent, hoping to appeal to their past friendship to sway her decision. Daemon, seething with anger over Otto's tactics, is ready to end the meeting with violence, calling out Otto's duplicity and threatening severe retribution. However, Rhaenyra intervenes, stating they'll send their official response to King's Landing the following day, keeping a lid on the escalating tension for the moment, much to Daemon's frustration. Daemon clashes with Rhaenyra over her reluctance to wage war against the Greens, forcefully arguing that they've already been dragged into conflict due to the Greens' aggressive moves. In a private conversation, he vehemently argues that submitting to the Hightowers, who have usurped her birthright, is unacceptable. He insists that her duty as queen is to quash the rebellion. Rhaenyra tries to remind him of the larger picture, citing Viserys' teachings about the Song of Ice and Fire and Aegon the Conqueror's vision of a united realm standing against a northern threat. Frustrated, Daemon briefly loses control, physically lashing out at her. He scorns Viserys' focus on prophecies as a way to justify his ineffective rule, asserting that it was the might of dragons, not dreams, that secured Targaryen power. After realizing his aggressive behavior and that Viserys never shared the prophecy with him, Daemon steps back, haunted by the revelation of his exclusion from Viserys' confidences and his own violent reaction. As Daemon processes these personal and political tensions, he ventures alone into the caverns beneath Dragonmont, where he encounters Vermithor, the formidable dragon once ridden by King Jaehaerys I. Singing an ancient High Valyrian song to calm the beast, he faces Vermithor boldly. Despite the initial hostility, Vermithor eventually quiets, sensing Daemon's resolve and perhaps recognizing a worthy rider. Meanwhile, as Corlys rejoins the Black Council and plans unfold to secure alliances with major houses, a piece of grievous news reaches Daemon. He learns of Lucerys' death at the hands of Aemond, quietly shares this devastating blow with Rhaenyra, deepening the shadows of war, personal loss that hang over them.
How long have you been selling secrets to Otto Hightower?
As long as he had gold to pay for them.
Reunion with Mysaria. After Rhaenys Targaryen and her dragon Meleys return from patrolling Blackwater Bay, Daemon meets her at Dragonstone. He presses Rhaenys to get back in the air, explaining he's planning an attack on King's Landing to take down Aemond and his dragon Vhagar. Rhaenys insists that both she and Meleys are exhausted and need rest and food, but Daemon is adamant, believing that together with Rhaenys and Melis, they stand a chance against Vhagar, whom he disparagingly refers to as the hoary old bitch. Daemon reveals that Rhaenyra isn't around. She's out scouring Shipbreaker Bay for evidence of her son Lucerys' demise. He vents his frustration about having to manage the ongoing conflicts at Dragonstone instead of leading efforts in the Riverlands. Rhaenys gently reminds him of Rhaenyra's profound grief over her son's death. Daemon counters, arguing that Rhaenyra is letting her personal sorrow overshadow her responsibilities as queen. Rhaenys responds by sharing her own delayed grief for her daughter Laena, suggesting Rhaenyra needs to confront her son's death similarly to find closure. Daemon expresses his worry for Rhaenyra's safety, especially if she were to face Aemond alone. Rhaenys counters that Aemond would be the one in danger against a bereaved and furious Rhaenyra, commending her decision to distance herself from council duties to avoid rash actions driven by grief. Still irked, Daemon spitefully blames Rhaenys for Lucerys' death, suggesting that the tragedy could have been avoided had Rhaenys eliminated Aegon II and his cohorts earlier. Unruffled by Daemon's provocation, Rhaenys stands her ground, reminding him that he isn't the king, and walks away, leaving Daemon with his plans unendorsed and his frustrations unabated. Daemon's former flame Mysaria is caught trying to flee King's Landing but gets snagged by the Valyrian fleet's blockade. She's brought back to Dragonstone in chains by Sir Aeric Cargill of Rhaenyra's Queensguard. Facing her across the interrogation table, Daemon accuses Mysaria of treason, demanding to know the extent of her dealings with Otto Hightower. Mysaria coolly admits she traded secrets for Otto Silva, which infuriates Daemon. He slams the table and stands abruptly, accusing her of playing a part in Aegon's ascent to the Iron Throne and indirectly contributing to the chaos that engulfed Rhaenyra's reign and led to her son's death. Blood and cheese. Mysaria, however, remains stoic under Daemon's wrath. She argues that if she hadn't acted, someone else would have, as the Hightowers were desperate or Aegon would have eventually sought refuge in the Red Keep himself. Her pragmatic take only fuels Daemon's fury, who shouts about the consequences of her actions on Rhaenyra's life. Mysaria counters that Daemon is merely venting his frustration on her because his real targets are out of reach. Daemon presses her for more information on Otto's schemes, but Mysaria holds firm, insisting her dealings were purely transactional. Disgusted, Daemon orders her to be locked up as a traitor and storms out. Sir Aeric attempts to intercede on Mysaria's behalf, but Daemon whirls on him, accusing the knight of treachery akin to Mysaria's. When Aeric defends his loyalty to Rhaenyra and explains his inaction regarding Aegon due to the complexity of his vows amidst royal family conflict, Daemon is left seething. Their tense exchange is suddenly interrupted by the distinctive roar of Rhaenyra's dragon Syrax, signaling her return to Dragonstone and momentarily diverting attention from the heated confrontation. Daemon attends the Black Council meeting, during which he seeks Rhaenyra's permission to take control of Harrenhal, strategically important for their influence over the Riverlands. The meeting takes a dark turn as Rhaenyra orders the death of Daemon Targaryen as retribution for the murder of her son. Determined to execute her will, Daemon visits Mysaria in her cell to extract vital intelligence. He needs the names of spies who can walk unseen through the Red Keep and monitor its activities. Initially hesitant, Mysaria agrees to cooperate after Daemon promises her freedom in exchange for the information. Armed with the necessary intel, Daemon travels to King's Landing with a loyalist from the Gold Cloaks, known simply as Blood, who shares Daemon's deep-seated resentment toward the Hightowers. In the shadowy underbelly of the city, they connect with Cheese, a rat-catcher turned spy, who agrees to help Blood infiltrate the Red Keep to carry out the assassination of Aemon. Daemon pays half the fee up front, promising the rest upon delivery of Aemon's head. Daemon's plan takes a grim twist when Blood and Cheese find Aemon absent. Unwilling to return without completing their dark task, they instead tragically murder Aemon's young nephew, Prince Jaehaerys, in a brutal act witnessed by his mother and sister. This heinous act is a stark reminder of the brutal lengths to which Daemon will go in his quest for vengeance and control. When the news of Prince Jaehaerys' death spreads across Dragonstone, the shockwaves reach the Black Council. Daemon's barely concealed satisfaction tips them off that he orchestrated the deed. Rhaenyra pulls him aside, furious, demanding clarity on his commands. Daemon defends himself, claiming he only intended to avenge Lucerys' death as per her desire. He explains that Mysaria had provided names of 2 agents, and his orders targeted Aemon specifically. The assassin's deviation wasn't his doing.
When Sir Eric brought you the crown, did I myself not place it upon you?
Another scuffle with Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra, unconvinced, presses him about his orders if Aemond was unavailable. Daemon maintains that he never sanctioned targeting children. However, Rhaenyra accuses him of giving the assassins enough room to choose another significant target, indirectly fueling the Hightower's grief. Daemon insists on his innocence, but Rhaenyra remains skeptical, devastated by how his actions have tarnished her cause and painted her as a murderess across Westeros. Frustrated, Daemon declares his unwavering loyalty, reminding her that he crowned her himself and plans to rally an army at Harrenhal for her cause. Rhaenyra counters, highlighting his negligence during her labor and his undermining of potential peace talks with Otto. Daemon snaps, accusing her of naivety for entertaining Otto's proposals and exploiting her call for vengeance to satisfy his own darker impulses. He accuses her of marrying him merely as a political strategy, not out of love or respect. The argument escalates, with Daemon lashing out at the late King Viserys, claiming he was a coward too afraid to be overshadowed by his younger brother, and appointed Rhaenyra as heir only because she wouldn't outshine him. Rhaenyra retorts that her father's fears were not of being eclipsed by Daemon, but of not trusting him at all, a sentiment she now shares. Daemon bitterly argues that Viserys' pursuit of greatness was flawed by his aversion to bloodshed, a weakness he sees mirrored in Rhaenyra. She rebukes him for the callous murder of a child, branding him pathetic. With nothing left to say, Daemon storms out, leaving a rift of unresolved anger and distrust between them. That evening, Daemon takes off from Dragonstone, riding Caraxes through the darkening skies to Harrenhal. He arrives amid a fierce storm, dramatically landing atop one of the castle's ancient towers. With his sword Dark Sister in hand, Daemon moves through the dark corridors of the fortress. He encounters only a single guard, whom he swiftly subdues, meeting no further opposition as he advances toward the Great Hall. Taking Harrenhal. Upon bursting into the hall, Daemon declares his claim on Harrenhal in the name of the Blacks. The Castellan of Harrenhal, Sir Simon Strong, quickly yields to Daemon, pledging his loyalty to Queen Rhaenyra and inviting Daemon to share a modest supper. Initially wary of the humble meal, Daemon is reassured by Simon that no treachery is intended. Simon respects him as a distinguished guest. During their conversation, Simon expresses his disillusionment with Larys Strong, the current Lord of Harrenhal and a supporter of Aegon, condemning him as a kinslayer responsible for a deadly fire that claimed his own kin. Simon's loyalty, he insists, lies with Rhaenyra, not with his treacherous House Lord. Daemon, however, bristles when Simon addresses him merely as Prince. He corrects the Castellan sharply, reminding him that as Rhaenyra's consort, he should be addressed as Your Grace. Looking ahead, Daemon reveals his strategic plans for Harrenhal. It'll serve as a rally point for the Riverlords to amass their forces in support of Rhaenyra. He orders Simon to summon Lord Grover Tully, the aging and somewhat ineffectual Lord Paramount of the Trident, for negotiations. Despite Simon's warnings about Grover's waning influence, Daemon is resolute, aiming to secure the Riverland's allegiance before marching on King's Landing. This move, he believes, is critical in consolidating military strength and momentum toward reclaiming the throne for Rhaenyra. That unsettling night at Harrenhal, Daemon is jarred awake by a thunderous banging at his door. Sword in hand, he cautiously opens it, only to find the hallway empty. The eerie silence lures him deeper into the castle's shadowy passages, drawn by a distant, haunting hum. Tracking the sound, Daemon stumbles upon a surreal scene in a dimly lit room. A younger Rhaenyra, painstakingly stitching Jaehaerys' severed head back onto his body. Through tear-filled eyes, Daemon watches as the apparition chastises him for the chaos he perpetually leaves in his wake. He abruptly snaps back to reality, finding himself inexplicably in front of Harrenhal's weirwood heart tree, struggling to piece together his eerie journey. His confusion deepens as the dark-haired woman he noticed earlier coldly predicts his demise within these very walls. The descent into madness. Daemon's restlessness continues as he's jolted from another horrific vision of himself executing a younger Rhaenyra right before the Iron Throne. This time, Sir Simon urgently rouses him with news that Criston Cole's army is marching, and the loyalties of House Rosby and Stokeworth have shifted away from Rhaenyra, bolstering Cole's forces. Simon expresses grave concerns that Harrenhal might be their next target and doubts the readiness of any hastily assembled Riverlands army. The tension escalates as Sir Oscar Tully, the young heir to Riverrun, is introduced. Daemon, learning of Lord Grover's incapacity, makes a grim suggestion that Oscar hasten his ascension, a notion that leaves Oscar visibly shaken. Frustrated by Oscar's lack of authority, Daemon's patience wears thin, and he dismisses the Tully heir's indecisiveness with disdain. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Daemon orders Simon to call the Blackwoods to Harrenhal, declaring a need for decisive allies in the looming conflict. Awakened by a fierce storm, Daemon roams Harrenhal's eerie halls, clutching Dark Sister as he shadows what seems to be his nephew, Aemon. Startlingly, the figure turns around, revealing Daemon's own face. His restless pursuit leads him to the Maester's quarters, now occupied by the enigmatic Alice Rivers, the same woman he'd met before. Alice strikes a nerve when she points out Daemon's troubled sleep, suggesting it's haunted by the castle's sinister a legacy linked to the cursed weirwood used in its construction, a legend Daemon dismissively waves off as superstition. Alice probes deeper, suggesting Daemon's discomfort at Harrenhal stems from his reluctance to serve under Rhaenyra, whom he once doted on when she was just a girl. Her words incense Daemon, prompting him to sharply chastise her, dismissing her as a witch. Undeterred, Alice hands him a homemade potion, promising it will help him rest. The following day brings Sir Willem Blackwood to Harrenhal. He represents his young nephew, Lord Benjicott Blackwood, and offers Daemon troops for his cause. In exchange, he seeks Daemon's support in retaliating against House Bracken for their allegiance to Aegon and their recent assaults on Blackwood territory. Daemon, still shaken and seeing visions of his deceased wife Laena in the faces around him, initially views the Blackwoods' offer skeptically, seeing it as a mere extension of their age-old vendetta against the Brackens. Nevertheless, recognizing the strategic importance of their support, Daemon agrees to their terms. Now, that was Daemon's story from the show when I wrote the script for this video. Let's continue exploring the rest of it from the book. So, after taking Harrenhal, Daemon ensured that the entirety of Riverlands rallied behind Rhaenyra. Not resting on his laurels, Daemon then seized Stone Hedge from the Greens and consolidated further support for their cause. In the books, it was here that Daemon learns about the death of Prince Lucerys and contacts Mysaria to execute the whole blood and cheese subplot. As Daemon's past deeds and alliances begin to stir against him, Sir Otto Hightower, the hand of King Aegon II, capitalized on these rifts. He enlisted the Triarchy's fleet, which shattered the Velaryon blockade in a fierce battle known as the Battle of the Gullet, and resulted in the death of Daemon's other stepson, Prince Jacaerys. When Aemond and Criston Cole marched on Harrenhal, Daemon opted against defense, choosing instead to take Caraxes to the capital. His timely arrival played a crucial role in Rhaenyra's capture of King's Landing. Amidst the political upheaval, Daemon's lover Mysaria rose to become the de facto mistress of Westeros. In a more controversial chapter of his life, Daemon, accompanied by Nettles, a 17-year-old dragon seed, scoured the Trident looking for Aemond and Vhagar. Setting up in Maidenpool, Daemon kept Nettles close, which stirred much speculation. Despite her low-born status and the unlikely pairing, Daemon's affection for Nettles appeared genuine. They shared daily routines, meals, and even bathed together. So yeah, they were not really platonic. After 2 dragon seeds, Sir Hugh Hammett and Sir Ulf White betrayed Queen Rhaenyra at the First Battle of Tumbleton. The atmosphere in Rhaenyra's court became tense. Lady Mysaria fueled the Queen's growing suspicion of the dragon seeds, claiming that Nettles, Daemon's companion, was not only sharing his bed, but might soon bear his child. Enraged, Rhaenyra accused Nettles of using magic to win Daemon's affections and bond with her dragon, Sheepstealer. Rhaenyra doubted Daemon's loyalty and sent orders to Lord Manfred Mouton of Maidenpool to execute Nettles but spared Daemon, urging him to return to the capital. However, Lord Manfred, reluctant to harm a guest and a young girl under his roof, especially given Daemon's deep affection for Nettles, chose to ignore the Queen's command, pretending the order never reached him. When Maester Norrin relayed to Daemon that Rhaenyra had branded Nettles a traitor, Daemon bitterly noted the influence of Mysaria in this betrayal. He spent one last night with Nettles, details of which remain unknown. At dawn, Daemon assisted Nettles in preparing Sheepstealer for flight, watching her disappear into the morning fog without a word of farewell. Caraxes' mournful cry echoed through the air as she flew away, shattering the windows of Jonquil's tower. Daemon then left for Harrenhal, driving out squatters upon his arrival on Caraxes. He spent his days alone, haunting the Godswood and slashing at the castle's heart tree each dusk. After 2 weeks, Aemond arrived on Vhagar, accompanied by his lover, Alice Rivers. In the fierce ensuing battle known as the Battle Above the God's Eye, Daemon made a daring leap from Caraxes to strike Aemond through his blind eye with Dark Sister. The dragons clashed and plummeted into the lake below. Caraxes managed to crawl to the shore before succumbing to his injuries. Aemond and Vhagar sank into the God's Eye, their bodies only found years later. Daemon's fate remained a mystery, yet most believe he met his end in that watery grave. So, that was Daemon Targaryen for you. His escapades, alliances, and ways became known throughout the Seven Kingdoms, and people still remember him for who he was. Some adore and respect him, while others, well, not so much. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.